thank you everyone for coming out. Special thank you to our two speakers tonight. We're trying a new format where we have two experts tonight talking about fertility. So it's something new with us. I wanted just to relate a few things about Down to the Science. First being that this was started to directly connect the public with the scientists. It's a big gap in our society where there's just minuscule media coverage of the issue in these 7-minute clips and these snippets. So this is an important time for us to have a social discourse fueled from the position of science. So I encourage you all to play full out, ask questions, get curious, and just have fun. We're here the third Tuesday of every month. So, and the topic changes. The topics are always geared to topics of local impact. Generally, our issues are a third environmental, a third health, like tonight, and a third just general interest. I encourage you all, if you have a suggestion for a topic, something that you're just dying to know more about, to drop it in the bowl right by the door. There's a big glass bowl labeled topic suggestions. Just write it in there. That's how we got our topic for next month on drinking water. So this is an audience-driven series, so definitely take the time to drop a suggestion in. Secondly, we have an online presence. There is the website is sciencecafesf.com. There's a blog that is twice updated weekly with content that's related to the events. So even right now, in fact, I'll just show you really quickly. You can see what the website looks like. There's posts on everything from fertility to biofuels to earthquakes. This is a short, quick analysis of what it costs to get certain treatments. And the speakers will agree or disagree with my assessments later, I'm sure. Also, for the tech people in the audience, I encourage you to subscribe to the RSS feed. That's at a link in the upper right. And comment on the articles. This is, I usually post these based on reading certain journal articles. Comment on them. Get involved in the discussion. This is just another opportunity for you to have your voice heard. And lastly, my marketing strategy is forward to your friends. Tell your friends about it. If you have fun tonight, if you love what social discourse from the point of view of science can offer, tell your friends about it. Let them know that this is something that's cool and happening out there and available to them. Lastly, I'm going to just talk about the schedule and go over a few last logistics. We're going to do 2 speakers tonight. They'll each do about a 15-minute presentation, short and sweet. After the presentations, we'll have time for questions. We'll take a short break around 8 o'clock just to get our food, get more drinks, get your flowers. And then afterwards, we'll come in and talk about how you can get further involved. There's more education you want, resources for support around fertility. And we'll have right back in questions and go as far as we can until 9 o'clock tonight. I'll be passing out the microphone when you do ask questions. Two things about the microphone. Not close to it. When you're done asking your questions, turn it off.
if it's one of the chromosomal abnormalities that's compatible with life, most of that type of genetic abnormality is not compatible with life. So that's pick it up in those miscarriages, because most miscarriages are because there's something wrong with the baby. Kind of nature's way of taking care of its own mistakes, and there are actually a lot of abnormal embryos. In fact, when people talk about scientific embryos and the sanctity of life, even in nature, only about 1% direct measures, and this would be to actually look at the ovary itself, and I'm just going to the slides here, to actually look at the ovary itself, and I'll show you some pictures of what we call the antropharyngeal count, which we think is one of the best predictors. And this is a way to look at the ovary and get an estimate of how many eggs your body has released that month. And so the other thing you may not know is even though you only ovulate 1 egg each month, your body releases a whole cohort. And when you're young, that can be as many as 1,000 that actually leave the resting pool. And anywhere from 2 to 20 make it to the point that we can actually see them on ultrasound. And we believe that that number that we see is an indirect reflection of the total number of eggs you have left in your ovary. And we have a research project we just recently submitted where we actually have correlated an individual woman's antropharyngeal count with the age the mother went through menopause. Because there's already very good data to show that the age the mother went through menopause correlates with the age the daughter would go through menopause. But the question is this antropharyngeal count a genetic marker? And we think that it does. Anti-Mullerian hormone is another hormone that's made by the cells that surround the egg, called the granulocytes, the nourishing cells. And you can measure that, and that seems to be a good marker of ovarian aging. And inhibin B is another product of those granulosa or nourishing cells. You hear a lot, and there's a new kit that's marketed now about measuring FSH. The problem with FSH is it's really an indirect marker. And it has fairly high specificity, so if it's abnormal, it tells you something. The question is what does it tell you? But if it's normal, it doesn't really tell you that everything is normal. And by the time it's abnormal, maybe it's too late already. So I have a little bit of concern about this being marketed as a tool over the counter that women can test because it might falsely reassure you that everything's fine when maybe it's not. Thank you. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. It's the hormone from the brain that stimulates the ovary each month to make eggs. And as the ovary becomes more resistant, or as the level of inhibin B, which is an inhibitor of FSH, falls, FSH goes up. So low FSH is good, high FSH is bad. It's a plant. But the question is, what does FSH mean? And in the past, we used to think that FSH meant the eggs were bad because we thought quantity and quality go together. But more and more studies are suggesting if FSH meant the eggs were bad, then miscarriage rate should be higher if your FSH is higher. But it actually isn't. And what our information shows, particularly for young women, it's not very predictive at all. It's very predictive, we think, about egg number. But we believe for young women under 38 that FSH and egg number really don't matter because most of the eggs are good and healthy. And so even if you have 2 or 3 antropharyngeals, they won't do much better than a 42-year-old who's got 10 or 15 follicles. So we do think that quantity and quality are different, and that FSH is probably primarily a predictor of quantity and not quality. And so just to give you an idea of this, what you see in antropharyngeal count, the advantages of it are that you can do it any time of the cycle, whereas FSH needs to be in the early part of the cycle. And if any of you know anything about diabetes, there's a test in diabetes called the hemoglobin A1C. So if you measure somebody's glucose, it kind of will reflect if they just had a piece of cake. The hemoglobin A1C is kind of an average of what their glucose has been over the last 2 to 3 months. Well, the antropharyngeal count, the follicles that we're measuring left the resting pool 3 months ago or more. So it's really giving us kind of an index of what's happening over 2 or 3 months versus an FSH which might be different today than it is tomorrow, might be different this month than it is next month. And this is what the antropharyngeal is, and as you can see on the top side, eggs and cells. days, and now they're every 26 days. Because if you start to see a shortening of the intermenstrual interval, that's suggesting some ovarian aging. And the same thing if women start to have spotting before their menstrual cycle, because one of the first things that happens hormonally as the ovary ages, an ovary makes primarily two hormones. It makes estrogen primarily before ovulation, and after ovulation it makes progesterone. And the first thing that happens as the ovary ages is you make about half as much progesterone as you do when you're younger. And so progesterone is what stabilizes the lining, so it's receptive for the embryos to implant. And then if you don't get pregnant, as estrogen and progesterone levels fall, the estrogen sheds, and you should just start a flow and have a period. And if you kind of have spotting for several days before the flow starts, it suggests that the lining is not stable and not predictive. And so there's a lot of things that you can know about your body, how old your mother was when she went through menopause, what's going on with your menstrual cycles and have they changed, and then lifestyle things that you can do in terms of smoking, healthy diet, a healthy lifestyle. Unfortunately, it's not. I see women all the time who come in at 42 or 43 and say, but I exercise and I'm so fit and I'm so healthy, and that's great for your heart and lungs and all that, but it doesn't seem, at least at the present, that that delays ovarian aging, and that's what we're still trying to investigate. So I'll stop there, and phthalates are chemical. Jim, that's a thyroid expert back there? Phthalates are chemicals that are found in water frequently. They are chemical products, I think largely from plastics, but get into our water base. It's a great question, and we don't know that. And there are some animal models that have looked at that, and in animal models it does. We don't know about the human. And what it actually does in the animal models is the telomere length stays longer. And so if we find that in fact these women who have ovarian aging have shorter telomeres, then we may start to pursue that hypothesis a little bit further. Not really, because there's also an enzyme that makes telomeres. And so, yes, you're right, as the cell goes through cycles of divisions, it loses telomeres, but you can also maintain telomere length. And people who tend to live longer, have longer telomeres, cells that turn over more quickly and die more quickly, their telomeres shorten. And so it doesn't seem to be just cycle division, and that there may be a way to preserve your telomeres and preserve the health of that DNA.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes. We're going to have
fertility preservation about 9 years ago. Is this okay? Is this too loud? Am I too close? No. So 9 years ago, I got this call from a father, and he was extremely distressed. He had a daughter who was in college who had just been diagnosed with leukemia, and she was going to need to have a bone marrow transplant at some point. And the reason why he was so distressed was that the chemotherapy that would be used for the bone marrow transplant would cause her to lose her ovarian function. She would go into menopause in her early 20s. And he had called all over the country, and he had found a place that would freeze her eggs on the other side of the country. And he said, you know, I talked to them, and they told me that at Stanford you're doing research in egg freezing, and you can do this, and will you please, you know, do this to my daughter? She's not feeling well, and, you know, please don't make her go to the other side of the country. So at that point, for patients like her, we were having them get a sperm donor if they didn't have a partner and freeze embryos. And obviously, you know, someone in her early 20s who didn't have a partner, that was a distressing thought to, you know, be committed to someone on the sperm donor. So we got together as a division and decided that we would start offering this for patients like her. So she was the first patient that went through, and that was in early 1999. So egg freezing, the first reported pregnancy from a frozen egg was in 1986. And initially, the results with egg freezing were terrible. The eggs just did not survive the freezing and thawing very well, and then if they did survive, they didn't fertilize. There's a little shell around the egg, and that is damaged in the freezing and thawing process. So if you put a thawed egg with sperm, like we do with standard in vitro fertilization, the eggs just don't fertilize. So people gave up freezing eggs for a while, and then in the early 1990s, a technique was developed to help men with low sperm counts. And this technique, called intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI, was revolutionary for men with low sperm counts. And then people started to think, well, maybe this would work with the frozen eggs. So they found that fertilization using this technique, when you injected the sperm into the egg, worked quite well. And so people became interested again in looking at the process of freezing eggs. And then people started changing the solutions and looking at different ways of freezing the egg, and the success rates improved quite a bit. So the process
So the process is essentially the same as someone who's doing in vitro fertilization. And what that involves doing is giving patients follicle-stimulating hormone, the hormone that was discussed earlier. And that's the hormone that it stimulates the ovaries to produce eggs, and that's the hormone that we give patients when they're doing IVF.
It's biased against you for some reason.
No, knows I'm not technologically advanced.
We can do this way.
Okay. So with this process, what we do is we give patients follicle-stimulating hormone, and then this is what we hope to see when the patients are going through the cycle. So this is an ovary that has been stimulated with follicle-stimulating hormone. And you can see there are a lot of these little black circles. So those are little follicles, and they should contain eggs. And so right before we take the eggs out, this is what we hope the ovaries look like by ultrasound. And then this is the way the procedure is done. So the patients are on the hormones for about 2 weeks, and then we do this procedure with a little needle. It's just a little bit thicker than what's used to draw blood. It's a little bit longer, and it just goes through the top of the vagina, and it takes about 15 minutes to do. This is an actual picture of doing it. You can see the needle right there. And patients are asleep. You don't remember being in the room. And then you can go home 45 to 60 minutes later. So it's not a really big procedure. The recovery is pretty quick. And then this is what we hope to get after, or when we're doing the retrieval. So this is what an egg looks like. So when we're doing the retrieval, we send fluid to the embryology laboratory, and they're looking at the fluid, and that is what an egg looks like. And hopefully we get many eggs, and then they're frozen and stored at that stage. And then when patients decide to use them, however many, they can be stored indefinitely. And when patients decide to use them, then they're fertilized, and then this is what they look like the day after they're fertilized. And then that's what they look like 3 days after they're fertilized. And that's the stage that we usually will transfer embryos from eggs that have been frozen. And then sometimes we watch the embryos. So if we have a lot of eggs, a lot of embryos, sometimes we'll watch them a couple extra days to a more advanced stage. So this is what they look like 5 days after they've been fertilized. And this is the tank. This is how they're stored. So if someone has eggs or embryos that are frozen, they're frozen in liquid nitrogen and kept in tanks that look just like that. So there's a lot of talk about freezing eggs for just future fertility, and obviously there are a lot of ethical issues involved with that. There's some people who decide to freeze eggs even when they're going through an IVF cycle. So typically when people are going through an IVF cycle, we fertilize all the eggs, and if there are extra embryos, then they get frozen after they've been fertilized. But sometimes there are patients for ethical reasons who don't feel comfortable with having embryos frozen and want them frozen as just eggs. There are people who go through this process because they have a cancer diagnosis or a medical diagnosis and want them stored for the future, and they don't have a partner at the time. Or sometimes they have a partner and they don't want them stored as embryos. And then sometimes there are single women who just are not at the stage where they're ready to have a child and want perhaps some options, increased chances in the future. And the one other thing that is related to this is a new area that we're looking at is taking eggs out from women who haven't been stimulated. So typically when women do in vitro fertilization, we have to use those FSH hormones. There's some women, though, who are very, very sensitive to those hormones and actually can get quite uncomfortable and sometimes relatively sick from the procedure because if their ovaries get really big, sometimes they start to retain a lot of fluid, and there are a lot of problems that can be associated with that. So we're looking at safer ways of stimulating or perhaps not using these medications, and then just we're looking at taking the eggs out when they're less mature and maturing them in the laboratory. And this is something that I think may have some benefit for some of our cancer patients too. If they don't have time to go through this process, we can take out the eggs at an immature stage and still give them some chance in the future. So those are areas that we're looking at and active areas of research in our department. So, quick little overview.
Thank you, Dr. Westphal. We have time for a couple of quick questions before we take a break. And let's get we're getting another chair up there so they can both be up there to answer your questions. I'm going to start off because the mic is in my hand and that's just how it's going to go. Why oocyte cryopreservation over embryonic cryopreservation, which is further along in the research and its ability to demonstrate its demonstrated capacity?
Well, worldwide there are many, many children born from embryos. So, if I see someone and, they know who they're going to have their children with, there's just much more data and, I think it's pretty straightforward to freeze embryos in that situation. But there are a lot of women who are uncomfortable with, if they don't have a partner, some of them don't want to go and get an anonymous sperm donor. And then there's some people that are uncomfortable, even if they do have a partner, with having embryos. They feel more comfortable, something should happen with discarding eggs as opposed to fertilized eggs or embryos. So for some people there are ethical reasons for not wanting to freeze embryos and social reasons. And I had one patient who, before we started freezing eggs for single women, had gone to a sperm bank and had frozen, I think, about 30 embryos. And then she met her husband, they got married, and she was in her 40s at that point and was unable to get pregnant with her husband. And so she ended up using her frozen embryos, but she was quite bothered by the fact that she wasn't able to use her husband's sperm, and she really wished that she had at least had some that hadn't been fertilized. And some people will do that. Some patients will have some as eggs and some as embryos, and that gives them some other options.
Can I just paraphrase something you said? Swapping before the menses mean that there's less estrogen, the woman has less estrogen because the estrogen is not stabilizing the blood enough? Is that what you?
The question was about spotting before the period, and there's actually several things that can cause that. But what I worry about with ovarian aging is actually not a deficiency of estrogen, but a deficiency of progesterone, the other main ovarian hormone or female hormone. Causes a lot, that kind of particular pattern of shortened cycles and premenstrual spotting. There's other things that can cause premenstrual spotting: fibroids, polyps, which are structural abnormalities in the uterus, infections in the uterus. There are other things that can cause that, but that can be a sign of a deficient amount of progesterone.
And I thought that caffeine definitely has been proven to prolong your fertility, and the slide suggested.
Prolong or lead to infertility, time to conception.
To gravido.
It has been in large amounts, but not in moderation. So most of the data that I'm aware of was from 2 large studies from Europe. And it suggests, really, depending on how you make the conversion to milligrams of caffeine and whether you're talking a Starbucks grande latte or whatever, but as long as you're less than 2 or 3 caffeinated beverages a day, probably doesn't make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much for this presentation. My question is for Dr. Cedars. Would it be accurate to say, based on what you presented, that women aged, say, 36, 38, 40, there's quite a bit of variability in terms of fertility?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of variability, and that's part of the problem with our current recommendations is they're based on populations, because that's all the data that we have. And we know that as women age, fertility declines, and that's why the current recommendations of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, which is kind of our parent organization, is 12 ovulatory cycles or 12 months of attempted conception for women under 35, but 6 months for women over 35, which doesn't necessarily mean we're going to treat women over 35, but you don't want to waste time if it turns out that there's a problem. And so you're right. I mean, as I said, the person who's destined to go through menopause at 55 or 56 probably has nothing to worry about at age 36. But we don't, number one, know that. And we don't, number two, know how to identify who's the woman who's going to go through menopause at 42 and who's the woman who's going to go through menopause at 56 or 58. All of which would be within the realm of normal.
Yeah, I had a coworker who went through menopause, I think at 26, but she had a couple kids by then, and then I had a boss who had a child at 44, so
Right.
definitely seen up close to variability. I had a follow-up question, which was, I know that there's studies where they take pictures of women at different times in their cycle, and that people say, oh, that woman looks juicy, that woman looks fertile, she'll look sexy, to use the common term, the unscientific term. And people can actually, if you take the norms, people can actually visually identify when a woman is most fertile. Are you aware of this research?
I'm not.
I mean, I guess if you were doing ultrasounds and you could see when they were about to ovulate, I mean, that obviously...
Are these like facial pictures or
Yeah.
these?
Oh, facial,
pictures.
oh.
Yeah, that's what I got the picture. This is like,
Oh.
looking at you sitting right here. No
These are
ultrasound.
pictures of looking at their
You
ovaries.
know, they just take pictures of them just sitting there, and people can more or less, males and females can more or less identify where, it's the same women that are given, the pictures are given to different
Well, I did hear that
judges.
there was a study where they said women who were about to ovulate dress differently. So I don't know if it's related to that, but that women who were about to ovulate, they definitely dress differently than when they weren't in a fertile part.
Well, I
So
think
there
it's
may be,
similar research where they take pictures of women when they're at their most fertile at least, and they give the pictures to judges, and then they're asked to say, how attractive do these women seem, and then they're judged on average as higher attractive or more juicy, whatever. You're not aware of this.
yeah, well, I think it may be related to that study where that women, they did dress differently. So that may be partly, I
That's
don't
just
know
part of the
exactly.
same research,
Yeah.
they're doing similar research. Anyway, since you don't know what I'm talking about with this, I imagine that you're not familiar with any research that correlates with how fertile a woman is at, say, 36, 38, 40s with visual appearance. Because I know some women in that age range that look, anyway, I'll stop there.
Well, we have patients, I have patients that come in all the time. I mean, I have 50-year-old patients who come in who, I'm surprised they're even, I would think that they were still in their 30s. Unfortunately, no matter how good of shape you try to stay in, I mean, your body knows, your ovaries know how old they are. I mean, we're programmed the way that we've been programmed, thousands and thousands of years. And so, 100 years ago, you were 40. I mean, you were a grandmother or a great-grandmother. You weren't thinking about having children, and, you were close to being dead. So, seriously, I mean, we've kind of changed what we think of as a normal lifespan because, people are staying healthy and they're living longer and longer, but, our ovaries haven't changed, and, people were not having children, thinking about having children when they were in their 40s, early this century, and it's only, in the last 50 years where people are healthier and, 40 doesn't seem very old at all anymore. I mean, everyone thinks they're, 40 is young, and I don't even know when people are old anymore, but it's completely changed. 60 still is very young, but we've completely changed the way that we look at age, but our ovaries haven't changed, and so even when patients look really young, it doesn't mean that their ovarian
There's no
function.
studies that either of you are aware of correlating visual appearance and say once a woman is past 35 with actual fertility.
I'm not aware of any. I mean, it makes some teleologic sense. I mean, other species have scents that they put off when they're in a fertile period. So, I mean, if you look at all of reproduction and all of evolution, or, you know, it's the reproductively the hardiest, and the person who maybe has the, you know, come hither look may be the reproductively hardiest. But it makes some teleologic sense, but because humans, as opposed to a lot of other species, have sexual relations for other reasons besides reproduction, I think that we've sort of lost that connection a little bit. So I'm not aware of that.
We're going to take one more question before we take a break.
So I have a question about if a woman is trying to get pregnant, what are some of the things that she can do to increase her chances of having a conception occur?
How about if I look at, the question was what can you do to increase? And I think one of the ways to look at it is things you can do to not decrease. Because I think a lot of times women do things that actually are counterproductive. So, you know, one of the things I see people do is they'll, quote, save it up until the day that they're sure that they're ovulating. And there have been studies that have shown that women can get pregnant when the last episode of intercourse is up to 5 to 6 days before ovulation, but within a day after ovulation there are no pregnancies, because the egg only survives for about 12 to 24 hours. So one thing I would tell you is if you're home trying to make babies the old-fashioned way is throw away the thermometer, throw away the ovulation kits, and have sex. And if your cycles are regular, you tend to ovulate about 14 days before the onset of your period. So if you have this mythical perfect 28-day cycle, then you probably ovulate about day 14. If you have a 35-day cycle, you probably don't ovulate till about day 21. So I would figure out your longest cycle and your shortest cycle and go back about 14 days plus 2 from your longest cycle and have sex every day, every other day, every third day. That's the other thing, is people think they have to have this ritual that it has to be every other day, or it can't be every day. And there are very good studies that show that every day is fine. The sperm, if it's normal, survives for 2 to 3 days. So I would say don't regiment your life so much.
How about twice a day? Is that okay?
Unless you're 60. And then
Unless I'm 60.
unless you're 60.
Then you gotta do it 3 times.
Well, no. See, that's where the every other day comes from, because ejaculatory volume decreases as you get older. And so if you have intercourse too frequently, even though it doesn't seem like it's a very long distance, there's not enough in the ejaculate to get the sperm all the way to the cervix. So for young guys, frequency probably doesn't matter. As men get older, one of the things that happens is their volume decreases. So healthy lifestyle, don't drive yourself crazy, don't make your life not your life. A cup of coffee in the morning is fine, a glass of wine until you know you're pregnant is fine. I think the worst thing people can do is completely topsy-turvy their life so that it's not their life anymore. So I would say, you know, if your cycles are regular, it's easy, throw away all the kids. If your cycles aren't regular, then you probably need to see somebody sooner rather than later, because the 12 months is 12 ovulatory exposed cycles. So if you have 4 cycles a year, don't wait a year. You probably are not going to have 12 ovulatory cycles that see sperm and egg at the same time. But if your cycles are regular, you know, I would say don't drive yourself too crazy.
Well, on the note of keeping our lives the same and having more sex, I think we'll take a break. Thank you for everything in this first half. What I want to encourage you, if there's anyone in the audience that is having fertility problems, like check around and see if there might be other people in the audience going through the same thing that you're going through. So definitely talk to other people in the audience, get more to drink, get more to eat, and we'll be back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.